Favorite Playable Class. This doesn't make as much sense as Favorite Playable Race, because there are certain races that exist within D&D in the various editions that weren't meant to be played by player characters. The one that immediately comes to mind are Drow, from particularly 2nd edition. They were certainly more powerful than other player character races, but there were huge, obvious hints that they were meant to not be used by players. One of the biggest ones being that they have these really awesome equipment, boots and armor and weapons and everything that have inherent magical abilities, and they're instantly and utterly destroyed upon exposure to sunlight. And even if you don't expose them to sunlight, they lose their power over time because you've taken them out of the underground radiation of the Underdark. Classes, on the other hand, I'm hard-pressed to think of an example of many classes that were not meant to be played by the characters, by the players. Offhand, the ones that first come to mind would be the NPC classes from 3rd edition: Commoner, Warrior, Expert, and Aristocrat. And even of those 4, Expert and Aristocrat were almost good enough to be regular player character classes. And you wouldn't hamper your character too much by choosing one of those as, a couple levels of those, or one level maybe of the Aristocrat. So, but let's go with classes. Like the race video from yesterday, it does depend on the edition. So I'm going to go from easiest to hardest. The easiest edition is 4th edition, Warlord, Tactical Warlord. I played a fighter, I played a rogue, I played a wizard, and I've played every type of warlord, and all of them pale in comparison to the Tactical Warlord for fun. To this day, the only reason I will play 4th edition is if you let me play a Tactical Warlord. I otherwise don't enjoy 4th edition very much. Let's see, so the next easiest after that would be Original D&D, also called Old D&D or Old D&D. And Basic, and the BECMI rules. BECMI is Basic, Expert, Champion, Master, Immortal, I believe is the way that those go. It's basically expansions on the basic rules. You had the basic rules, then which, like, Holmes only went through level 3, but the basic rules go up to a certain level, then you become an expert level character, then you become a champion level character, and there were additional little rule books for each of those sets of levels. So for OD&D and Basic, definitely the Fighter, my favorite class. Partly because it's the only one I ever really played back then. In 1st and 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, the Paladin is my favorite class. If I couldn't play a Paladin... Now, Paladins back then, you had prerequisites. If you've never played the earlier editions of D&D, starting with 3rd edition into 4th edition and Pathfinder, there's no requirements to be a class, really. Some classes have, like, alignment restrictions, and there's, like, prestige classes like Arcane Archer in 3rd edition where you had to be an elf or a half-elf. But base classes, anyone could be anything. That was one of the big changes that 3rd edition brought about. Any class, any race could be a wizard. Even dwarves that have historically been so adverse to arcane magic that they got save bonuses from it. But now anybody could play it. Before then, if you wanted to play a certain class, you had to meet certain ability score requirements, in addition to racial restrictions. You could not play a fighter. I want to say you couldn't play a fighter unless your strength was 9 or higher. But it might have been that fighter was the one class, like the really easy to get into class that anyone could pick. I do know that if your intelligence was too low, you couldn't be a wizard. If your wisdom was too low, you could not be a cleric. And if your dexterity was too low, you could not be a thief. But I think fighter was the easiest one to get into. Paladins were very difficult to get into, because this was back when you had to roll ability scores. You had to. The default method was 3d6 in order. And in order to become a paladin, you had to have a 17 charisma. That was the hardest one to meet. But there was also like a 14 strength, or a 15 strength and a 14 constitution and a certain level of wisdom. They had a very restrictive set of prerequisites. I managed to play a couple second edition paladins because by then we were doing kind of like the 4d6 or 3d6 arranged to taste stat generation methods. But in that set, I loved playing a paladin, and if I didn't qualify for paladin, I wanted to play a fighter. Hitting things is fun, and wearing armor is fun, and not getting hit back is fun, and even if they do manage to hit you, having a lot of hit points is fun. The next easiest would be 3rd edition. 3rd edition is when I started to play all of the classes. My very first 3rd edition character that I rolled was a half-orc barbarian, but the very first 3rd edition character that I played was a human rogue. I had gone for the barbarian first because I wanted to hit things hard, and the barbarian had the quote-unquote broken rule of letting you move 40 feet around instead of 30 like everyone else. I remember that blew my mind when I read it in Dragon Magazine during a 3rd edition preview issue. But I played the rogue. I was much more willing to play all the different classes. Much like I don't like elves, there are certain classes that I don't particularly like. Some of them, for example, the monk and the... Well, some of them like the sorcerer. I totally like the idea of sorcerers existing, but I find the sorcerer boring to play, because you're just casting the same spells over and over and over again. Other classes like the monk, I kind of like the mechanical, like how many benefits the monk gets and all the different kinds of cool abilities the monk gets from a mechanical standpoint, but I don't like the flavor of the class. I don't quite like, these Eastern-style martial artists existing in my Western-style fantasy. So monk classes aren't that high up on my list as far as favorites. Although I totally like the monk class enough that I have created aspects of them in the game world. There are certain types of monks that I have specifically and deliberately put into my campaign setting so that they can exist. 3rd edition, I really like. I actually didn't like the 3rd edition paladin very much. Their abilities were too limited. The new they worked very much like they did in 2nd edition, and then in fact, they had additional abilities on top of it. But compared to the kinds of things the other classes got, I felt like paladins were way too limited. I mean, you got a warhorse, and that was kind of it. And your smite evil once a day if you manage to hit, and you waste the attempt if you swing and miss. I didn't like that. I always felt like a paladin should be, you get to deal that damage if you hit. And if you don't hit, you can try again next round. I like that idea. But if I had to choose a favorite class, again, fighter. Fighters got feats, lots of them. And feats were the best part of 3rd edition when we first started playing. My longest played 3rd edition characters were fighters. I had Mikhail, who was a human fighter archer. I had Cervantes, who was a human fighter dual wielder. He fought with with 2 swords. Not one of my longest running characters, but one of my favorites is Hurley Masterton, who was a 2-handed fighter. He had a big greatsword. I did a lot of fighters because I wanted to stack as many feats as I possibly could into a character. So in 3rd edition, fighters were probably my favorite class. But because, like I mentioned, I started playing a lot more of all of the classes. I played all the different classes in 3rd edition. Cool tip, if you don't mind playing any given class, be the last person in the party to make a character. This is something that I started doing in 3rd edition. There were so many cool options that you become paralyzed. There's so many different things you could do that you don't want to pick just one. So by making the rest of the party first, having all the other players create their characters, they kind of force you into a certain role, and that helps narrow down the number of character decisions you can make, and it makes it easier to pick out what exactly you want to play this time. It has a couple of benefits. One of the benefits that you might not know, in addition to helping you narrow it down if you have way too many character ideas, and my brother and I, we used to make characters for D&D just to make the characters. I remember spending several summers, my brother and I would make characters, not just one character, but like entire parties of characters. We would find a picture online that had multiple adventurers in it. We would make up each of those adventurers, and then we would just tell stories about what our adventurers did and what their narrative was, as though we were running campaigns. This was when we didn't have anyone available at the time to play in the game. Then, but the other benefit of making your character last is because you're filling a niche in the party, you're finding one part of the adventuring, quote-unquote, requirements that need filled that the party's lacking. So a lot of times, don't ever do this if you don't want to play a cleric, because clerics are one of the things that gets left out the most. But the party is basically saying, hey, see this area of the game? Be it healing as a cleric, be it trap finding as a rogue, be it getting beat on as a fighter at the front of the line. You get to do that. So every time we do that, that's your time to shine. They get to basically define what your time to shine is. And it's fun. And when I was when I was forced into making a cleric, I made the healingest healing cleric you could ever heal. And when I was forced into playing the trap finder, oh my gosh, did I find traps, and I did that so super well. Now that Pathfinder has come out, it did a lot of things to improve the classes from 3rd edition. One of the biggest problems with classes from 3rd edition was there was a lack of choices as you leveled up, and a lack of benefit as you leveled up. Nobody liked gaining a level and not getting anything. Your base attack bonus didn't go up, your save bonuses didn't go up, you didn't get a special ability from your class. They were called dead levels, and a lot of people had them. Pathfinder has made it so that you never have a dead level. You will get something at every level. And that's good, because people like getting stuff. They also added choices into pretty much every class. It used to be as a fighter, you got to choose your feats. As a spellcaster, you got to choose your spells. But as a rogue, you didn't choose anything until you got high enough level, because you'd have to be up 10th level as a rogue to start getting the special roguey stuff. So they made sure that you had stuff to choose earlier on. Barbarians got to choose. Now they have rage powers and all that fun stuff. So adding that choice into the class is great. And so now, more than ever, I love playing any class. Go ahead and let me just pick last, and I will pick any class, and I will have fun. I do still have some classes that I don't really like in Pathfinder. The Oracle. The Oracle is pretty much fine, but for the drawback that they're forced to choose. I don't see why they need to have a drawback. It doesn't seem like there's a mechanical balance concern where they're somehow more powerful and that drawback helps to limit their power. And I also just don't like the drawbacks that are offered. I think there's only like 4 in the book, maybe 5. And they all seem way too penalizing, except for Haunted. Because I know one is lame, and I think one is blind. And I don't really like them. I don't like the Gunslinger class very much, from a mechanical point of view. I've always wanted to play a character... Wait, is that one of the questions? What is a character you want to play in the future? Alright, so maybe I'll talk about a different one. I've always wanted to play a character who uses a rifle and is, kind of like a sniper. In D&D. I might have mentioned the other day about Gripplies, and if I didn't, Gripplies are these frog dudes, and I love them, and I've always wanted to play a Gripply sniper. Part of the problem is, in Pathfinder, none of the rifles with good range can be used by a Gripply. So they're forced to use these smaller guns that have a shorter range, and then you're not really sniping that far. The Witch is kind of boring. It falls into the same trap as the Sorcerer. By the way, I'm not a big fan of the Pathfinder Sorcerer. I don't think they get very good abilities. And they still fall into that trap of doing the same thing over and over again. Well, the witch also does the same thing over and over again. Even though they have their own set of spell lists, their hexes, you're going to be hexing the same kind of hex all fights, every fight, all the time. My screensaver just came on, so hopefully that doesn't affect the screen recording. And what else did I not like? The Alchemist seems like fun, but I've only ever seen one person play it, so they might actually have something to offer. But otherwise, I like a lot of the Pathfinder classes, and I'm having fun with them. And so choosing a favorite Pathfinder class is hard, but most recently I'd have to say the Bard. I have been on a real kick of playing debuffers, or buffer debuffers. The Witch is a great debuffer. I'm playing a Bard who's very good at buffing right now, and as soon as he hits 8th level and is able to take the Dread Dirge, or whatever it's called, then he'll be a good debuffer too. One of my favorite characters is a rogue in Pathfinder. His name is Knuckles. My name is Knuckles, and I punch people. And he has a set of feats and everything that lets him do a lot of debuffing to a target in just one punch. And that's what they used to call him. Oh, call me One Punch Willie. Boom! He had a level of monk, so he could punch. One of the reasons why I like the monk class. But otherwise, he could do the exact same thing by hitting people with, any other bludgeoning weapon. I forgot the point of that. Oh, debuffing. So debuffing is something I've really liked, and there's a lot of classes that offer that as an option. All right, this is so far the longest one. So we'll come back tomorrow with our favorite game world, which is totally awesome, and I'm going to have to divulge tomorrow, because in addition to D&D, I'm going to share my favorite game world of all time, which is not D&D. Until next time, bye-bye.